Hello, in today's video I'll be talking about integers. Before I get into that, I just want to talk about some of the numbers we've been using so far this year. We've been using pretty much all positive numbers this year. We've used positive whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0. We've used fractions, positive fractions like 1/2 or 3/2. We've used decimals like 2.5 or 2.25 or 4.99. And we haven't really used negative numbers this year. When we use positive numbers in everyday life, we don't say that they're positive numbers. Okay, if you say, well, how much is this movie going to cost? It's going to cost positive $10. Or what's the temperature outside? It's positive 65 degrees. Or what was the score of the game? Positive 7 to positive 14. But the truth is, when we talk about the number 2, we are really talking about the positive number 2. Positive 2. But because we're dealing with positive numbers so often, we just assume that every number we say is positive. Okay, but one way to write 2 would be to say plus 2. One way to write 4, plus 4. Or to write 5.5, plus 5.5. Positive 5.5. So it's not just a symbol that means plus, it also means positive. Well, every positive number has an opposite. Okay, has a negative number. So the opposite of positive 2 would be negative 2, and the opposite of positive 3 would be negative 3. And notice they're the same distance away from 0, so 0 is 1 unit away from 1, okay, or 1 is 1 unit away from 0. Negative 1, its opposite, is also 1 unit away from 0. It's just in a different direction than the positive numbers are. And these arrows on the side here, they mean that this number line goes on forever and ever and ever and ever and has every real number you could ever think of, including square roots and pi and all this stuff on it. So the word integer, which is up here, integer, and what we're talking about today, is all of these whole numbers that we've been using, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and also their opposites, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, and so on, all the way forever and ever in that direction. Keeping in mind that the opposite of 0 is 0. One of the places that you might see negative numbers in everyday life might be on one of these. This is a thermometer. Notice in California, we're mostly around here, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Sometimes if you go to Tahoe, you'll get it down to 20s, 10s. But there's places that get below that, negative 10, negative 20, negative 30, negative 40 degrees. So sometimes people call this, 30 degrees. And then they might call this 30 degrees below 0. But some people call it negative 30 degrees. And they mean the same thing. So 30 degrees is 30 units positive, 30 positive units away from 0. Negative 30, or 30 below 0, is 30 units south of 0 or below 0. So, for instance, in Vostok, Antarctica, 2 days before my birthday in 1983, there was a temperature recorded that was negative 128.6 degrees, or 128.6 degrees below 0. A Packers versus Cowboys game on December 31st, 1967 was played at negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping in mind that water freezes at positive 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's cold. Another time you might hear about negative numbers in real life would be when you are talking about elevation. People hear about the Mile High City, which is Denver, Colorado. Presumably that's about a mile above sea level. Okay, so you have sea level. We'll do a little blue. Let's pretend that's sea level. And most places that we live and walk around and hang out in are above sea level. meaning above this elevation. So you can picture a number line, kind of like the one we have here. Let's see if we can clone that. Let's see if we can copy this number line here. Let's copy it. Let's go over here. Let's paste it. Alright, now let's spin it. Alright, so this is what kind of elevation looks like. So at sea level is like a 0 feet. And everything above that is positive. 1 foot, 2 feet, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet. But everything below sea level is a negative elevation. So if you said negative 2 feet high, that would be at 2 feet below sea level. And like I said, most places we hang out in are positive numbers of elevation. However, there's dry places that you can walk around in that are technically below sea level. For instance, New Orleans is 7 feet below sea level. So that's the elevation in New Orleans is negative 7 feet. You may have heard of Coachella, California. The elevation of Coachella is negative 72 feet, or 72 feet below sea level. Death Valley, we've all heard of Death Valley, that's 282 feet below sea level. The elevation of Death Valley is a negative number, negative 282. So if I wanted to write the elevation in New Orleans, I might say negative 7 feet. The elevation of Coachella, negative 72 feet. The elevation of Death Valley, negative 282 feet. Okay? The opposites of those numbers are positive numbers. But we don't write the plus sign, even though you could, even though that's what it means. We just write 7 feet, 72 feet, 282 feet. These are opposites. Okay? So the opposite of a number, 5 for instance, the opposite of 5 is negative 5. The opposite, and I'll just say OPP, the opposite of a negative number, like negative 6, would be positive 6. But we don't really write positive 6. We just write 6. The last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is something called absolute value. To do that, I'm going to pull out a number line here. Here we go, number line. The absolute value of something is just its distance from 0 on the number line. So for instance, the absolute value of 2, well, it's 2 units away from 0. So the absolute value of 2 is 2. So I'll write that down. Absolute value of 2 is 2. Well, I'm kind of tired of writing all that out. Absolute value of 2 is 2. So there's actually a mathematical symbol for absolute value. It's just 2 lines with the number in between. So the absolute value of 2 equals 2, because it's 2 units from 0. Well, let's check out the absolute value of negative 2. Well, it's 2 units away from 0. So the absolute value of negative 2 is also 2. Because we're talking about a distance from 0. And there's no such thing as a negative distance. So the distance from negative 2 to 0 is 2 units. The distance from 2 to 0 is also 2 units. I think of it as like how many steps would it take to get to 0 from 2? 1, 2. So the absolute value of the number 32 would be 32. Because it's 32 steps away. The absolute value of negative 32 is also 32. So ways we can use negative numbers. When you take money out of your bank account, you take 20 bucks out of your bank account when you go to the ATM, your bank account is $20 less. We could say there's negative $20 in your bank account. You lose 10 pounds, you could say that's negative 10 pounds. 20 degrees below freezing, or not freezing, 20 degrees below 0, negative 20 degrees. You could say that you made $100. That would be positive 100. But remember, we don't use the positive, so we just say 100. If you climbed 200 feet up, that's positive 200. That would be just 200. You dove off a cliff and you lost 60 feet of elevation. Negative 60 feet. Okay, so those are some of the ways we can use positive and negative numbers, and we'll work on that tomorrow in class. Thanks for watching.